Senator Cramer, he's on the Armed Services Committee now, as many of us know, and he was one of the very few senators that was briefed today on this Iran situation. Things seem to be heating up, so he's going to give you some exclusive insight on that meeting today. Are we going to go to war with Iran or not? Plus, he talked about the second round of trade aid. We may get some clarity on that sooner than you think. And he also, wait till you hear this, he had an hour-long meeting today with Lieutenant General Todd Semonite from the Army Corps of Engineers, all about building the wall. When are we going to get this thing built? Here's my interview with Senator Kevin Cramer. Senator Cramer, welcome back to Point of View. Thank you for your time, sir. You just walked out of this briefing on the Iran situation. Take us in the room for the people watching right now. What do we need to know that came out of this briefing?
Well, what's important about a classified briefing in the Senate SCIF with 99 of my closest friends and the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Defense, and the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff is what I need to know. And most of the time, the reason it's classified is that you don't. But that said, Chris, what I walk away from that, you know, some things that are confirmed, some things that are new, of course, but for me, a sense of confidence that, you know, our military, our president responded appropriately to threats that were credible, into intel that was credible and specific, and they responded in a way that detoured a miscalculation on the part of Iran and its proxies that I believe prevented loss of life and any attacks on human life. I think we all know there were some things that were done to assets in the region, you know, ships and oil assets in the region. There was, you know, certainly some briefing on that, but more importantly, the U.S. response, the ally response, and reminding us that this is a 40-year habit of Iran to test us in these ways. And you know, this time I think we responded properly, and they withdrew.
So just for clarity, sir, because there has been some questions about the credibility of the things you just mentioned. You talked about you had the hits on the boats from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Norway. There was the pipeline, and also there was the missile that was launched at the U.S. Embassy. So just for clarity, you're saying that those all did come from Iran, and that was confirmed today?
Well, I'm not going to confirm that. I'd leave that to Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Shanahan, whether they want to confirm you know, that level of intelligence or not. All I can tell you is that I'm convinced that they're convinced that Iran has intentions, and at least had intentions, that would have been devastating had they been allowed to do them. But I think, Chris, for North Dakotans and for Americans, it's important to remember this 40-year habit that Iran has had of attacking U.S. personnel throughout the world, and how we respond matters, and how we respond has to be in a way that, you know, both deters them from doing it more of it, doing it again, while not escalating you know, the fight. And the other thing I think that Americans and North Dakotans ought to know is that, you know, we've been withdrawing from some of the areas in the region. Our troops have been withdrawing troops. Some of our naval vessels, Navy vessels, have been deferred in maintenance that now are getting some of that maintenance. So we're much thinner, if you will, in terms of our presence and our readiness in the Middle East. And, you know, it presented a little bit of an opening, perhaps, for Iran to test. And, you know, if they thought we weren't going to do anything, I think that we demonstrated that we're not going to just sit back and, you know, and go untested.
I think the big question is this, Senator, is that when you look at, we pull out of the Iran nuclear deal, we obviously lifted the waivers and made it so we want, hey, no oil being sold out of Iran, which decimates their economy, hurts their people. This seems like the obvious response from Iran. So my point is what's the strategy? What did you walk away from today and go, okay, here's our strategy to go against this threat of Iran, which I'm assuming we all knew was coming?
Well, first of all, you know, they're the reason that they're terrorists. We aren't making them terrorists. And they've been a state-sponsored terror for a long time. They have, in addition to their own Iranian guard, they also have proxies, as you know, throughout the region. So, I want to make sure that we're clear that this is Iran doing what Iran does. This is not, and maybe it was in response to some things the United States has done on our own behalf and for security of our people. All of that said, going forward, I think that the lesson is that we need a deterrence, that the cost of peace is deterrence, and the cost of deterrence is having, modern, appropriate weapons systems, naval vessels, troops on the ground throughout. And we can squabble about, whether we're occupying. We can disagree policy-wise on what's the appropriate deterrence. But the reality is that the world relies on American deterrence. I think that the bigger question, at least in my view, is what of our allies? We have allies in Europe and other places that benefit from the United States being the cop on the beat. The president has been very clear that this isn't a sole responsibility of the United States. And so I think we have to continue to work through our diplomatic channels with our other allies that benefit from, in some ways even benefit from a further conflict between the United States and Iran. But clearly they have to be in it with us.
Well, speaking of that, I want to get your take on this, because I'm sure you saw the news recently where German Chancellor Angela Merkel lumped the U.S. in the same as with China and Russia as being adversaries. You've seen Angela Merkel and the president of France, Macron, call for their own EU army. So what's your response to that and the fact that we consider them allies, but now they're lumping us in with Russia and China and calling for their own EU army?
Well, I think you have to give, even politicians from our allies that talk silly, sometimes you have to give them some room in their own political environment. They know it. One of the things to be honest, Chris, one of the things that I find frustrating, whether it's our European allies that's saying, yeah, keep taking on China, to take on China, stop China, we're counting on you to stop China, while they are happy to, fill the gap when there's an opportunity economically and cheer us on quietly, or in a situation like we're having right now with Iran, where they're advocating or cheering us on quietly while at the same time taking advantage of the vacancies that might occur economically. It does get a little bit frustrating, and this is why Donald Trump is president and why so many people like him being president, because he doesn't let that kind of rhetoric go unchallenged, just like they're getting by with such a paltry investment in NATO, while the United States is the big investor in NATO to protect them. Donald Trump has called these people out on that, and I think that's why he's president, and that's why he's restored some of our credibility, both with our allies and our adversaries.
A couple of bottom line questions, sir, and I want to move on to some other topics. Are we going to a war with Iran?
That is not the intent of this president. As you know, he ran on getting us out of wars, not getting us into them. I'm sure you've noticed a little bit of the rhetorical back and forth, even within his own troops, in the White House. I should use the word troops a little more carefully when we're talking about literal troops. But that he's really, I think, done a good job of de-escalating while at the same time sending that strong message. No, we're not going to war with Iran. Nobody wants to go to war with Iran, least of all Iran. But Iran also has to know that, don't provoke something, don't start something, because the end would not be good for them. So I think that we've found that balance, as we always do. We've seen Iran withdraw. We've seen them remove some of the missiles that they were putting in place, moved some people around that looked like they were taking a more aggressive posture. Now they've gone back into a more defensive posture. All I can say is good decision making.
Talk about in the context, sir, of your position on the Armed Services Committee, and then obviously representing North Dakota and our farmers here, and the challenges that we're facing right now with the trade war. Many people are saying, hey, you know what, let's get this thing done, let's win this war. Some are saying, hey, you know what, let's just take a deal and get our farmers back whole again. I've heard you talk about, hey, look, we've got to win this thing now that we're in it. Help people understand, when you look at what's going on with Huawei, the South China Sea, things of that nature, why it's so important to win this trade war, what that means for America, and then what do you like to see from the trade aid to make sure that our farmers do stay whole?
Okay, so you practically answered the question with the question, I think. China has been a bad actor for decades. The presidents, Republican and Democrat, have sort of rolled over whenever challenged or ignored or looked the other way at their foibles, and now we find ourselves with them having all this technology, them stealing much of our intellectual property as a requirement to even do business for them. By the way, including farm commodity genetics. I mean, there's nothing that they won't get if they can get it, with the ultimate goal of being dominant, not being a dominant consumer of our products, but rather dominating the very markets that we now enjoy. So we either stop them now or 10, 20 years from now, there's no stopping them at all. So again, it's got to be the long run. Now it's gone longer than I wish it had, and a lot of people wish it had. So the question then is, what about the aid? I'm very encouraged by the large number that the president threw out. Now there are farmers who are going to watch this and they're going to go, I don't want that aid. I don't want that aid in the mix. That distorts markets. So I understand that. And that's why I think how you use the aid has got to be very careful. But we're already talking. We're probably going to know what that package is going to look like this week yet. They're talking maybe a Thursday announcement. So if you're a soybean farmer, or you're a corn farmer, or you're a wheat farmer, or you're a sorghum farmer, or you're thinking about else because the rain has kept you out of the field to this point, that's the kind of distortion that can happen from an early announcement. And yet it's completely appropriate that we help our farmers through this rough patch, because this is a rough patch that is created by a squabble between governments. In other words, there's no free market where China's involved. So that ship sailed already. And when we're in this kind of a negotiation, clearly the government, in my view, has an obligation to help our farmers through this rough patch. But winning it's way more important than rolling over, cutting a deal that gets us through another growing season. We need to get through generations, not just a growing season.
I know you spent an hour today with Lieutenant General Semonite from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. What's the latest in the situation? Because I know Tommy Fisher protested something. They won the protest, and they still got denied. Take us inside the conversation today with Mr. Semonite.
So I think one of the things that's important to note is that we're dealing with multiple tranches of money here. There's the 2017 funding, 2018, and now 2019 fiscal years. There's also the additional, $288 or $208, $284. Those are the authorities from the Department of Defense moving money around. We don't know how much that's going to be. Each of those takes on a little bit different formula, takes on different responses. I can tell you that Fisher, Enterprise Fisher Sand and Gravel out of Dickinson, North Dakota, remains a pre-qualified, high-level competitor in all of these. So while so far they've been skunked, so to speak, this latest round that you're referring to was really hastily done. And it was hastily done because it's the money that has to be spent, has to be committed and spent this fiscal year. I believe the Army Corps of Engineers made a miscalculation in choosing.
Did he explain why?
Who they chose over Fisher. Yeah, because I think that they don't know enough about Fisher. Fisher hasn't wall work before. I think that entered into the calculation. They didn't tell me that, but I sort of gleaned from that because of the time frame and the pre-qualification piece that sort of boxes everybody else except people who've been doing the work, provided an edge that Fisher probably wasn't able to meet. I haven't talked to Tommy about this yet, but that's my analysis of it. But there are some really big parts of this project yet to be RFP'd and bid out. I really took them on over the issue of price, because these fast contracts that they're awarding don't even consider price. It considers the product, and then they negotiate the price later. The price has to fit within a certain cost, a certain cost structure based on the soil types and all this stuff. All I can tell you is that I have very little patience for bureaucratic BS, and I made myself very clear about that, along with some other projects that we're talking about with water, water use for fracking out in the Bakken. Some of the mumbo jumbo that they throw at you, it just exhausts me. And I told them, you should go on TV or radio in North Dakota, explain things to those people the way you explain it to me, and they'll tell me, my God, it's worse than we thought. So let's keep it simple. Price and quality. Build the wall.
Amen. Senator Cramer, thanks for the time, sir. We appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Always my pleasure. Thanks, Chris.